Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today, I guarantee you, we're going to have a conversation with Dean Hickman-Smith. Dean, and we're going to have one that's going to bend the mind a little bit, that's going to have a myth-busting, contrarian point of view, all woven together with a lot of fun. But we're going to be talking about how the CRO Playbook we know today is already obsolete. In fact, when you and I had our first conversation, you talked about what I'm doing now versus 3 months ago. A lot of it is completely different. And we know the market is changing. We know the technology is changing. We know everything about our B2B go-to-market motion is changing. And so I just love the way that you embrace it, right? We're going to talk about that today. In addition to some of those accolades that I've already talked about, 20 years in sales, you've gone through 3 successful IPOs in your time, and you've lived through it. So congratulations. You also are a horse breeder. And if we're lucky, we might see a horse walk by in the background. You also dabble in and are a competitive acrobatic pilot. So how you had time to do this like CRO gig, I'm not exactly sure, but I would love to hear your version of your background, a couple of minutes, and where you're working now before we get started.
Steve, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm really lucky to have been able to experiment with lots of things in the last 20 plus years. It's been great. Obviously, I'm from London originally and came over with NetScreen back around 2000. NetScreen was just an amazing company to work at. I was really lucky to get involved with that thing. We were involved with it in Europe and then got involved with it in the earlier stages over here. Worked for just a fabulous human being called Mark Smith, who introduced me to how to do things in America. And I think that's lesson number 1. Get yourself a really good mentor who can guide the way for you. Did a crazy startup after NetScreen. We did go public and we were acquired by Juniper, which was great. I thought I was really good at startups and stuff. So I went off and did an early stage one called Concentric Networks, where we learned a lot about raising money, getting going from scratch, getting a little bit early ahead of the kind of product market fit. And we ended up exiting that one to Samsung back in the early 2000s. And that really got me into Proofpoint. And Proofpoint really scaled up. I guess Proofpoint was really a cloud company, a cloud SaaS company. We turned it into a SaaS company. So we grew that one to a good size and an IPO. I went back with the NetScreen guys to do a company called Aerohive, which was in the cloud managed Wi-Fi space. And we scaled that one up and got that one to an IPO and was acquired by Extreme Networks after the IPO. Since then, I went into identity for a little while. Now I'm with a company called Testlio. We're in the crowd testing space. And what we do is basically we test customers' software to see if it works anywhere in the world on anything. We get all that data and we run some AI models against it and we help customers build better software. And we're getting heavily into testing AI and AI-driven solutions. It's a pretty hot space to be in. And I've been there for 7 months and I'm happy to say that it seems to be growing really well. We're hiring and we're building out our operations globally. Like you said, Steve, it is a constant circle of learning. I like that I've probably made more mistakes than I've made good decisions in the last 20 years in various different ways. And I've learned from them. I can apply some of the learnings to what we're trying to do now and build out this one. And by the way, the horse breeding thing, that's my wife who got me into that. I never thought I would be involved in anything to do with breeding any animals, let alone horses. They're quite big and they're quite dangerous. And competitive aerobatics I've been doing for years.
Hello, my LinkedIn friends. Got to say, there's not a lot that's more fun or exciting than flying aerobatics. But what we've got coming out on Tuesday at Testlio is an absolute game changer for the industry. So join us on Tuesday at testlio.com for our full product launch.
I've been flying for a very long time. Happy to talk about that later on, actually. Let's get into aerobatics later on after we've had some business discussions. I'm sure people follow you for the business discussion than they do to hear some guy prattling on about aircraft.
I think you're being a little bit modest on the horse breeding thing, because you were just telling me how like you can play the roles of midwife and you can be like up to your shoulder in the process. That's not for the faint at heart. I'm a goat breeder, which has none of the status, none of the prestige of being a horse breeder. But I know how difficult and how stressful it can actually be, especially when it happens in the middle of the night or whenever.
Well, weirdly, it only happens in the middle of the night, right? They birth at night because that's when their natural predators aren't out there to attack them. But yeah, it always happens like 2 or 3 in the morning. There's some science, though. They have these devices that tell you when it's going to happen, and it calls your phone. They're not exactly reliable. You get lots of false alarms. We could get very National Geographic talking about. Should you let? I've got pen and video.
Well, I'm going to take control of the host and I'm going to steer us back to the business world. There was something that you said when we first met, and you talked about how the quarterly revenue plan is actually a relic. I have the gray hairs that you do too. We used to have 5-year plans, 3-year plans. So now you're talking about like the quarterly plan is a relic and that you need like 30-day reinvention cycles. Tell us a little bit about your thinking and how you apply that.
Yeah, I think, look, we're in a phase of constantly reinventing ourselves. Of course, there's an annual plan. There's an annual plan that you tell the investors in your company that you're going to aim at. Increasingly, I have found that we have to break that down into smaller and smaller chunks. Our customers' software evolutionary process has evolved that it's so much faster from concept to ship. Things have accelerated. Automation has accelerated so many things. So what I look at now is, did I say 30-day cycles last time we spoke? Because I think what we do now is we're in the details weekly now. We've broken things down to a very functional weekly cadence. We expect our sales teams to be so much more aligned to the customer now because they've got so many tools to do so much more research, to understand the customer environment better. That's why we have to dig in deeper. Things change. Customers react faster. Customers build software faster. They want to ship faster. New features come out even faster. And we've got to be aligned to all that. So we've got to have all of our little intent signals much better tuned to our customers so that we can deliver more value back to our customers to help them through the decision-making cycle. We are learning, certainly every 30 days from our team, things that are both in the sales cycle important and also from a product perspective important that we need to feed back to the rest of the company. That's why we've shortened that kind of feedback loop. And that's where I'm at right now. It's a very interwoven circular motion, go to market, customer feedback, product feedback, marketing, interpreting that into enablement training, re-equipping the sales team with the latest so that we're following this 360-degree feedback loop, which seems to be working pretty well.
You made a point early on in your answer there to talk about the customer focus and then bringing that into the rest of the company. There was a really incredible study that was done 2 or 3 years ago by McKinsey, and that they said that only 15% of companies actually execute on a voice of the customer program. But you just brought it up as the most important thing in translating that into the rest of the company.
That's an interesting one. You can over-rotate and you can constantly be you can constantly be changing your focus, which that would be detrimental. And we would overload and kill our developers if we weren't able to prioritize and link these kind of feedback sessions to real revenues. We do spend quite a lot of time then looking at the feedback and quantifying it and giving it a revenue that's, if you do this, I will deliver that type conversations. And that's important. There's a feedback loop and then there's a prioritization conversation that's continually happening, and a prioritization in terms of what we're feeding back to product and then what product thinks they will deliver to us by when, so that we can then feed that back into the enablement cycle.
I love it. You talked about that cycle has to be dependent on customer outcomes, like product truth mapped to customer outcomes. I think that's like when I was mentioning that study there, it's a discipline. It's not a bunch of different departments working in silos of different forms and beliefs of customer truth, one in product, one in sales, one in marketing, one in customer success. How do you unify that? When I talk to B2B C-suite executives, the number one challenge that they tell me that they have is internal alignment. What you just talked about was an incredibly aligned set of departments and teams inside of your company. So I'm just curious, that's not an easy feat to achieve. I'm just curious about how you do that.
This is where it starts. I think culture is a big piece of that. You've got to work with people that have a very significant amount of mutual respect. And the old 2 ears, 1 mouth philosophy applies very strongly to the way that you communicate with each other. We have the obvious kind of meeting. We're a very distributed company, by the way. We have executives in Estonia. We have executives in Europe, outside Estonia, in the UK. We have them on the East Coast of the US, and I'm here on the West Coast. You have to be pretty flexible to get that kind of level of communication going, right? So my day starts, I don't know, sometimes at 4 o'clock in the morning, because that's when it's the time where we can all unite. Second, all egos are parked at the door. Everybody comes to the table with a very firm commitment to having robust conversation, but in a really collaborative manner to try and come out with an agreement. We will debate robustly and then agree, and then we take action. That sounds a bit trite, but it's the way it works. If you have an ego in the room that will go passive aggressive on you, will agree at something and then delay something, or you have egos in the room that just can't come to an agreement, the magic doesn't happen. It's when you get a bunch of intelligent people debating with an agreed kind of, okay, we're going to come out of this with a solution. It's got to have ownership, and it's got to have a timeline by which it's going to be deployed. That's when it starts to happen, and you can iterate and you can innovate, and you can get that repeat feedback loop happening really quickly. The flywheel starts happening. Customers pile in because they understand you're innovating. They give you more and more feedback, and then it's really, okay, now let's do the prioritization thing. What are we going to do that's going to result in the best outcome for the company? Yeah, my job is to try and steer the conversation from the customer and customer success perspective as much as possible, give as much, I think, prioritized feedback. And prioritization in my context is really kind of revenue aligned. If you do this, I'm certain I can deliver this amount of revenue by this time frame, and then we sit down and figure out how we're going to get it done. That answer the question?
It did. And the most important part was it all has to lead to, I think you called it customers piling in or something like that, because they know we're innovating. I'm just going to keep replaying things that you said before in our other conversations. In terms of innovation, you said control kills innovation. Context fuels it.
Yeah, actually, in a number of different areas. Let's talk about it from the GTM perspective, first of all. I have a global team of people. My expectation is to hire and enable those people to be successful, and then for them to be the experts in their field. I'm trying to push as much control out to the field as I possibly can, because I want them to understand all of the dynamics in their theater. I don't think top-down control in that context works at all. You end up with very vanilla programs that might work in America, but don't work in Europe. They might work in New York, but they don't work in Atlanta. And they certainly don't work in Florida. And then when you start adding, we've got a bunch of customers in places like in Asia and Europe and Latin America, these things happen differently. The events that work in one location don't work in another. The outreach cycles and the outreach programs in one area do not directly translate to another. You hire people, enable them. And I used to think that it would take 6 to 9 months to enable and ramp somebody. Now what I'm doing is really focusing on two things. One is, as I said, hiring GMs of each region and enabling them with their own mini P&L. Second, I now think that the enablement cycle can be massively accelerated. We really go deep in the first 30 days. And my expectation is that on exiting that 30-day period, my hires are able to have a C-level conversation about our relevance to our customer, to our ICP. And they can therefore be productive inside 90 days rather than the old model, which was, okay, probably in 6 to 12 months, actually, that person's going to take to ramp. I think we can deliver a powerful enough enablement package to get people fluent, and then they can go off and do research that makes them really fluent in their region, in our ICP. That's one thing. Second thing is 80% of the selling is done before we walk in the room. Most of our customers have done 80% of the research and preparation, and our team is really there to help the 20% make the decision in our favor. We are spending a lot of time creating customer communities, because the first thing that Steve, my new customer in New York, does when he's looking at Testlio is call Jane, his former colleague, who's now at a competitor or at a similar company at least, and is in Steve's peer network and is already using Testlio. It's so important that we create these kind of snowball effects with our customers, because the first thing that happens literally is that peer referral. I'm thinking about Testlio. What do you think? If we don't have all of our customers really happy with the service, seeing real value out of the product offering, then we stand a good chance of not winning the deal. That's the second thing that I feel like we really need to bring together, enabling our team with enabling our customers to build communities around them. Spent a lot of time on that really in the last 7 months since I've been here at Testlio.
Here's what I'm taking away from what you just said. I'm going to put some other context on it. We aren't bequeathed trust. We have to earn trust in what we say and what we do. And that's not a trite comment. The most recent Edelman Trust Barometer showed that worldwide, 32,000 respondents said that business leaders like you and I, 68% of them said that we are being intentionally misleading. So, in other words, our voice is put into a category, no matter what set of values and morals you have and you put into your team and how you communicate, your voice is not going to mean as much as the peers that you were just talking to, the people you're selling, the existing customers that are the peers, their voice supporting, you're creating a trust infrastructure. It takes time and it takes diligence, but what's most important about it is you recognize that those are the voices that matter the most. And there's a lot of companies that don't do that diligence. That's not a written case study that's in a PDF that has some testimonials in it, right? I want to hear more about why you're spending that much time in creating that peer validity.
You bring so many thoughts to mind in that in that monologue. I think the seller of today has got to do two things. Number one is they've got to create that customer flywheel around them, because that is the validation that differentiates us from the competition, is really getting the third-party trust validation that you mentioned. The second is authenticity. I think the value of authenticity in an AI-driven world is what's going to differentiate the world-class seller, the world-class go-to-market professional from the average. Because right now at our fingertips, we've got so much data, so much to prep with, and it's so easy to prep. Everybody has a seat at the table very easily and can say quite intelligent things. And that's table stakes, right? The fact that you can prep for a meeting in not minutes, it still takes a little bit of time, but you can prep for a meeting now using tools that literally would have taken days of work previously. I think that any seller that's not fully availing themselves of all of the research capabilities that AI brings to the table, then they're failing there. But what's going to differentiate the seller is now the value of authenticity. I am spending more time now on the road than I was 12 months ago. Not spending quite as much time as I was on the road 10 years ago. Proof point era, we were on the road, 200, 300,000 miles a year for a long time, but we weren't efficient then. Now my trips can be efficient. I am very well aligned to the customer meetings I've got. The briefings that I've got going into a customer meeting are just so precise and so world-class that I feel like I can bring real value to the table. But the reason I'm on the road is because I do want to be authentic. I don't want to be reading from a script. I interview a bunch of people now, Steve, and they sound great, but then you realize if you take them a little off script, everything is something they've pulled from AI. That's not how the real world functions. That gets you the seat at the table, but then you've got to still have the real world ability to react to the certain particular customer situation. And that requires depth beyond just a prompt. That does require a customer to say, yes, these guys go the distance for me. Things blow up, but they fix it. That's what I mean by authenticity, is you've got to have presence in the room. You've got to be in the room. You earn that through doing the research up front, but then you've got to be able to then go deep with the customer when needed.
Here's what that brings up in my mind. We're approaching on the podcast 300 conversations with B2B C-suite executives. Not one of them has ever disagreed with this statement. We're in a relationship-based business. And as much as AI and content and Zoom calls and different things like that can help build relationships and communicate meaningful, impactful value, what you're talking about is we believe ultimately in the people that we want to do work with. Instead of making another monologue, I just was talking to a chief customer officer that was on the podcast, and he relayed to me that his direct ICP was a CISO, and that CISO had just concluded a buying phase they had added to their tech stack. And he said, I got 14 different companies that came in. They all answered the RFP. They all checked every single box in our RFP. He says, here's the one thing that I wanted to know. What's it going to be like to work with you after I hire you? You just started talking about service. And that's what I'm taking away is that you're out there saying there's real people behind Testlio and we're going to be there for you and we're going to build that relationship.
I think that's the thing that is the differentiator. Well, actually, it's not, right? First of all, you've got to be so fluent in your subject matter that beyond the initial AI research the customer and their team have done, you've got to be able to lead the conversation to a successful landing. But that is just the start. And most customers are changing the way they buy now to, everyone talks about land and expand, but it's really, okay, let me put a toe in the water. I mean, you may say you're great. My friend may have had a great experience with you, but I really want to test this thing out. I want to date a couple of times before anything happens here. If the sales motion isn't aligned to the success motion, if you have an intermediary that's some sort of implementation team as well, if that flow isn't totally perfectly orchestrated, and if the customer isn't getting value from the product within a very short period of time, you're not going to get the expansion, and you're definitely not going to get the result that you want. I think that it is that. It's just the whole world has evolved to pretty much a land and expand experience now. Customers are putting a toe in the water with that first purchase. There's normally a follow-on order that's 60 to 90 days down, but that first engagement is really just the license to go and develop the business with the partners. We're very keen to make sure that the salesperson is involved in each of those different steps all the way along. They're monitoring the conversation. They understand the success criteria really closely. They're fully aligned with the team that's going to be doing the implementation and that customer touch. And yeah, that's how it works.
You know, that sales involvement that you just talked about, you said the best sales teams don't close deals. You said they provide a value hypothesis that shapes conversations, that leads the customer down the path to the right decision. I just thought that was an interesting, like the best sales teams don't close deals. What did you mean by that?
I meant that it is an orchestration role. I'll use an aviation analogy, right? If you try and land the plane, it'll be a heavy landing. If you try and force the plane onto the ground, it'll be a very heavy landing. The way you land a plane gently and elegantly is you hold the plane a little bit of an inch above the ground until it runs out of energy, and then the main wheels touch down and you run out of energy, energy dissipates, and the plane settles very gently to the ground. I think that's a good analogy for the modern world we're in from a selling perspective. We are guiding the customer onto the runway, and we're letting the customer naturally come to this energy state where everything is smooth, everything is what the customer expected. They're going to come back because they enjoyed the flying experience with us. They're going to rebook, and they're going to use us for all of their travel.
We've talked about a lot here today, and our poor human brains can only take in about 2 or 3 things at a time, and then we just shut down. If there was one thing that you wanted the other B2B C-suite executives that are going to be taking in this conversation to take away from the conversation, the one most important thing, what would that be?
I think my answer is going to be a little long, I'm sorry, because there are many things I'm trying to weave into what's happening right here, right now. And I don't think AI is the be all and end all. We're in an AI enabled world, which means everyone's forced to try and do things faster. But I don't think AI helps with the fundamentals that you're often faced in our role in go-to-market. It just shows flaws in your go-to-market faster if you don't have the kind of feedback loop that I was referring to earlier on tuned in your organization. I don't know if you've ever read it, but there's a guy called John Boyd, and he wrote a book called the OODA feedback loop. And it was all a military jargon, but it was observe, orient, decide, and take action. It's this kind of way of making decisions that have impact, but also pushing the ability to make decisions out to the field so that people can make quick decisions. And AI seems to me to be a way in which we can give better signals to the team, but getting that feedback loop where we're taking those signals back into the way that we enable our team, the way we give feedback to our product groups and our marketing teams is even more important because the speed at which customers are expecting us to interact with them is continuing to accelerate. The message for me is that we've got to unify. If we're going to be an efficient organization, leveraging the tools we've got, leveraging the new tools that are available to us, then we've got to bring it together so that it's a constant feedback loop and check the ego at the door, have robust conversations, make decisions, take action. That's my feedback.
The whole mission of this podcast is to bring different perspectives and experiences and perceptions and interpretations of how we create success together, from C-suite executives all over the C-suite, all over the world, If we can do that, then that's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you certainly had some perspectives today that took that tide to a whole new level. I just wanted to say thank you for coming on and just thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Steve, I enjoyed it too. I've been doing this a long time, and one of the things I really love is to try and help people grow. I think you asked me earlier, last time we spoke, what was I most proud of? I'm really proud of the connections I've made. Again, sounds a little cheesy, but it's the people, the connections I've made in the last 20 plus years of being in this industry that are the things that I'm most proud of. I've tried to create environments where people can grow. And what really excites me is seeing people that came in at an entry-level role, seeing them go on to get promoted through the organization and then become CROs in their own right and CEOs of other organizations. It's great to be able to talk to you and then share some of the lessons and share some of the mistakes and help people avoid them themselves. Thanks for doing this and giving me the opportunity to come on and have a really fun chat with you. Thanks a lot.